Evening, everyone, and welcome to our second in a series of talks for this year's Open House Festival, where we've been chatting to some of the UK's leading design-led architects. Yesterday, we had the pleasure of talking to the lovely Amos Goldreich about what it takes to create a truly thoughtful home. So if you missed it, don't worry, we recorded the whole session and we're sharing this next week on our socials, or you can sign up to our mailing list just to make sure you don't miss out. But before we get started, just some introductions. My name is Dean, and I'm joined by my colleague Christopher. Give us a wave, Chris. And together, we are the team behind We Design Homes. We recently launched We Design Homes as a new service designed to connect enthusiastic homeowners with some of the best design-led architects from across the UK and Ireland. So if you're thinking of refurbishing or extending or even building your own new home, please get in touch with us and see how we can help.
Thank you very much, Dean. I have the pleasure of introducing you all to today's guests. We're really pleased to welcome Jonty and Maddie, founders of emerging architecture and interior design practice, Studio Hallett Ike. These guys will be taking us through a bit of a journey of their award-winning home, the ER Residence, as well as a number of other upcoming, exceptionally well-designed homes. Each of which are driven by a want to deliver meaningful, articulate, and passionate architecture in response to their clients' needs. One of my favourite young practices in the UK, I welcome Jonty and Maddie. Lovely to see you both. Please get started and kick us off.
Okay, cool. Just share the screen.
No, I forgot to ask, forgot to mention, if anyone's got any questions throughout the talk, feel free to pop them in the Q&A session, and then when we get to the end of our discussion, we'll pick out some of the questions and see if we can get those answered for you.
Okay, so essentially what we're going to do is, as we've introduced, is to take you through our kind of process in broad strokes, but essentially how that relates to ER residents specifically. So a lot of these things can be extrapolated to new projects in terms of process, and it's kind of, but this is specifically about ER.
Good stuff.
Yeah, so briefly about us, obviously I'm Jonty. We started just over a year ago, our own practice, but been practicing for 6 years as a fully qualified architect, kind of mainly private residential, but also did some big kind of civic galleries and things like that coming through. And I think that the kind of architecture that we're kind of moving towards at the minute is kind of a real good amalgamation of both of our experiences, and it kind of really kind of pushes us towards this kind of warm minimalism that we're kind of striving to at the minute. Introduce yourself.
I'm Maddie, and I've been also in several different practices across London before we set up Studio Hallett Ike a couple of years ago, and similarly we're focusing on this private residential properties, trying to amalgamate our skills to create some nice piece of architecture for end user clients. So we're going to walk you through our process of ER residence and how the whole process happened from start to end. Initially, we were looking for a project, really. So when we were looking for a house, we needed something that we wanted to get into, something that we can really sink our teeth into. But our main sort of requirements when we were looking at properties were the proportions of the properties and how the spaces felt, not really necessarily how they looked immediately. So this was how ER residence looked when we first purchased it a while ago now.
And you can see, like, obviously, like, the thing that hit us straight away as soon as we walked in was, you know, there's huge floor to ceilings, amazing cornice, with a lot of potential. But you can also see the little things in here that we did change, that we'll talk about later. But the dark timber flooring, the kind of amalgamated kitchen galley style on the side, it was okay for kind of existing, but it wasn't kind of, it didn't feel like a home until we really kind of got into the detail. But what we did do is, you know, we were there for a year, 2 years, living there while we were kind of trying to get everything sorted in our own minds about how we wanted to approach it. But I think that really helped us identify what we wanted to do with the space, and that we'd lived it at its kind of worst, and then we knew how we needed to tackle it to get it to its best.
Yeah, and our key requirements were really, we knew we wanted an extra bedroom, And we wanted to sort of just bring back a lot of love into the property, because it was, I guess, typical of many sort of London flats, just, you know, multiple owners over the years, just it wasn't really looking or feeling its best.
And it was very kind of living room centric, like everything happened in the living room. At the dining, because of the style of the kitchen, you wouldn't spend any time in there, and so you just sleep or do everything in the living room. And we wanted a place that, to make it feel bigger in terms of program, it was kind of dividing those spaces up a bit more, designated dining space, second bedroom, kitchen that you wanted to stand in that connected to the dining room, and then we had a kind of breakaway space in the main living room that was our kind of nest away from busy, hectic life in London.
Did that give you a chance to kind of warm up to some of the existing features that were in the house, or?
Yeah, I mean, the cornice we knew we loved. The flooring we knew had potential, because it was the original pine flooring. It had just been kind of dark stained, which in some places can work, but in this it wasn't working for us. And we wanted it to kind of peel the whole thing back to the kind of rawest elements of the room, and then kind of amalgamate different kind of textures to help celebrate the room, and really kind of take advantage of the height and the, because it got that kind of southern light in it as well. The front was south facing, and throughout the day you get these great shadows coming through. And we'll talk about the textures that we use on the walls later to really help enhance the way that the light came into the room, because that's kind of one of the most timeless things about the space, was how the light and how that, because it's been the same way since it was built, and we really wanted to celebrate how that room worked.
But I guess one of the key things was that it didn't feel like a fluid space to live in. It felt very like you do everything in this room except for cook in here and you sleep in the bedroom, and it just felt like disconnected, especially to the garden. I mean, this that image on the right with the door, that was the only way out to the garden, that was the only view of the garden, and it just felt like the garden didn't even exist for 50% of the year, really. So we knew we wanted to improve on that.
So these are kind of some of the unsexy parts of the house when we bought it. We didn't really pay that much attention to the front kind of room under the stairs immediately as we walked in, which is the image on the right, which had about 1.5 inches of water on the floor when we moved in. You know, but we kind of saw past that, and we're like, we can deal with this, and we can get that into a workable kind of great storage space, which London properties are begging for. It involved a bit of tanking and a bit of work, but it got there in the end. And you can see from the rear elevation of the house, it's really nothing that exciting. But one thing to note in terms of the way that we approached the extension was, so the door on the left, we kept that lintel. So keeping costs down in terms of low structural interventions is kind of a clever way to kind of to get a lot out of not doing very much.
Jonty, can I just confirm for our audience that the lintel you're talking about is a steel beam that runs across?
It's actually on here. It's a concrete one that they had in there. So essentially what we did is, to make the space that you'll see later, we just knocked out this low bit of wall and got rid of the door and stepped down through there. So a lot of extensions, they switch in London, they switch the living spaces to the back. So the kitchen goes to the back, and have a second sitting room at the back. Whereas that wasn't going to work here because of the way that we were going to address the project. And that obviously opening up, you have a lot more steel, a lot more structure, a lot more expense. So we wanted to use what we had to create something that, got us the extra space, made something kind of special, but didn't kind of cost the earth in restructuring the property as it was.
Nice.
I think after we'd lived there for a while, we were beginning to think a bit more seriously about the project. And it's something we do with all of our projects, is we always put together basically a mood board of different precedents and different architectural images that we reference. And these images we were looking at just in terms of the overall sort of look and feel. We're not really like picking them out to look specifically at, like this one on the right, like we want a really dark timber piece of joinery in the middle of the room. It was more just the overall sort of the hues, the palette, how the light works in that space, and start to sort of bring in those textures that we wanted to bring in in our own project.
I think it's in terms of the overall process and not just ER residents. This is kind of a way that we tackle the kind of early ons with clients in terms of getting across our vision. But precedent images, they can have pitfalls in terms of it's important that you have to kind of explain to the client that we're not showing you a space that you're going to get. It's more the feeling of a presence of the space is what we're trying to convey. It's kind of we're looking to do something like this, but we're not saying you're going to have paneling on the walls with a chevron floor straight from the off. That's kind of stuff that will evolve through the design process, but it's getting clients to get on board with the kind of broad brush, how we want the space to feel. And do you like that? Do we need to change this before we get too far in and too far gone? And it's kind of like, oh, we don't like any of that. So, we have our kind of go-tos in terms of inspiration, Van Dyson, Norm Architects, those kind of things that these guys are absolutely fantastic. And it's kind of, we can even kind of grasp a fraction of what they kind of do in the projects that we produce. We kind of think we're doing quite well.
Yes.
Do you like your clients to come sort of pre-armed with some of their own kind of mood board images, or is that something you prefer to work with them from the off?
Quite often when we start projects, we will set up a Pinterest board with the clients, and I will always throw on a load of images that we are immediately thinking about. So we start to begin the process and then invite them to it so that they can add to it. But generally, the process always starts in one direction, and you see over time how it changes to move into something else. And I think it's useful as well for us, because if a client has a very set vision, then we can very quickly determine whether our styles are going to be aligned or if we have to shift how we're sort of thinking. It really helps with kind of getting to the place where everyone wants to be.
It's also kind of an exposure thing. So clients, because they're not in the design realm, maybe they are, but it's kind of, they know what they know, but it's kind of your job as the architect to kind of open up that as well, to show things that they may not have seen before or may not have considered, or taking the points they've looked at and then showing them more of things that are kind of that have been done by either better designers or in more kind of successful projects, and getting people to buy into those kind of moves. So it's very much a kind of, from the architect's point of view, to kind of bring on the client in terms of encourage them to keep pushing to a certain point, and kind of have an open mind about what we're bringing to the table as well, because that's kind of part of why you've come to us, is because you want that input, which is important, and you're paying for our ideas as part of it. So it's kind of don't always try and be open, I think is basically what we're saying to what the architect's trying to do.
Well, you have a lot of people that only look at homes for inspiration and a constant look at homes, whereas your aesthetic comes from a much broader sense of architecture and interior design. So I suppose that's where you guys come from in terms of educating them and exposing them to something outside of that.
Because it could be, say, like a gallery, for instance, because obviously they deal with natural light the whole way, but it can be an image of something that's quite obscure, but you can convey that into a residential setting. It's just the essence of something that you're trying to kind of get into a project.
Great.
And then just kind of quickly, this in terms of ER residents, it was kind of looking at warm neutrals without kind of going beige at all. It's kind of, the timber was used to warm, but there's also the kind of cleanliness of the whites, and then the kind of the textures of some of the materials, like the clay plaster that we put on, and how they all kind of harmonize together.
I think it's important for ER residents. Our budget was tight, so we were trying to find affordable materials at the same time that looked really good, really clean, and worked with our overall aesthetic. So creating these, aesthetic mood boards really helped us sort of determine, drill down to the right direction in that as well.
And I think as well, in terms of the external, like the black cladding was done more in terms of with an eye for the garden, is that we wanted the facade to help the garden sing once we did that. So the landscaping stood out against the black, like you can see on this particular image, how much the black cladding makes the green pop in terms of colour. And we had a north-facing garden, so we went in tree ferns and kind of tropicals, but it really helped kind of bounce that green around. And the way we did it made it, we'll get into that later, but in terms of aging and all that, but that was kind of something that we knew from the beginning we wanted to explore. So in terms, again, in terms of our process at this stage with clients, we generally come to them with several options hand sketched, looking at different ways that they can approach their project. With the art residences is one of the kind of later sketches, in terms of, you can see it starting to take shape into kind of where it got to finally. The creation of like small courtyard in the in-between space through here, which is kind of like a little surprise for people. They don't always expect it to be there, but because of the way that we arranged the extension meant that we had to keep that to get natural light into the bedroom. But it gave us an opportunity to kind of get a nice plant in there, which helps break up the kind of the ebb and flow of the project. When you go into the bedroom, it's quite nice to see something green there as well.
Yeah, and because one of the main points of our brief was adding in an extra bedroom, we found very quickly when we were doing those sketch layouts that any sort of additional bedroom within the flat as existing and breaking up the space, which is compromising that main front room, which is something that we really wanted to retain. So as soon as you start adding too much in and over cluttering the flat, it just felt wrong in every sort of essence. So the only real solution was to add an extension onto the back, but due to budget and due to, you know, how we saw the space being, we wanted to have the bedroom on the back overlooking the garden. But I think what was important for us is to really create this flow through the property, which is as soon as you enter through the front door at the top right there, you can immediately look down the entire property and see back into the garden, which gives you that sense of space of property, rather than, you know, just you're in one room, then you're in another room, you're in another room. We wanted to sort of create the visual journey as soon as you enter the project.
It kind of to have that axis that we're talking about that kind of runs through there to the garden as you walk in. It kind of helps lighten the space, so it doesn't feel as heavy that you can see all the way through to the garden. It kind of takes a lot of the weight out of the property, and it's kind of makes the whole property feel a lot lighter than, you know, a big brick Victorian house.
Yeah, because it is a tight, narrow space, isn't it? There's no way around that, really.
It serves to pull you through as well. It's kind of a lot of people, whenever they came around to see it, they always remarked how big the garden was, but which you don't get a sense of from the front of the house. But as soon as you walk in, you see it kind of silhouetted, pictured at the end, and you're kind of pulled through into those spaces at the back.
But I mean, you can see from the plan just how sort of simple and straightforward approach it really was in the end, which really helped sort of keep our costs in check, but also just simplify the entire process, rather than just overcomplicating what is essentially a one-bedroom flat originally. And then at the same time, as we're doing these sort of test options and looking at the layout, we're thinking about materials in a bit more depth. So drawing on some of those textures and palettes that we picked up on earlier in the mood boards, and actually looking at those materials. And generally, the materials that we selected for this project, and most of our projects are all sort of self-finished materials, natural materials, raw finished materials, which generate more of like an overall hue and tonal palette rather than colors and things like that. We try to then sort of avoid trends of gimmicks, really, but look at it as more of like a material palette that runs through the whole scheme.
Yeah, it's kind of a tactile thing in terms of textures and tones as opposed to colours and things. It's everything kind of wants to work together, and you'll see in some of the, obviously people have seen before, the finished images at the end, there are certain photos where you see kind of everything, every one of those materials in a single image, but you're not picking any one out. It just is, and it kind of exists in that kind of space. And that's, I mean, reflecting is kind of good to see that, you know, we managed that, but it's at the same time, it is very nice when you've got a material palette that just sits well together, without any one thing trying too hard than anything else.
And then we started applying these materials, kind of in an extruded plan, looking how it would work within the project. And then we always look at the 3D visuals. So we do this for pretty much all of our projects. We find it as a really crucial tool to review how the space looks and feels, how the materials are feeling, how everything's sitting together. And we're also testing different furniture, different art and different lighting, so that we can begin to generate that overall feel and impression of how the rooms and the spaces are going to feel at the end of the project.
I think at this stage as well, I mean, in terms of the furniture and the architecture is something that gets commented on a lot on the images and kind of how it's curated, and the furniture becomes a kind of a real kind of piece that should be thought about in the process at the beginning, as well as it shouldn't just be you've done this amazing place, plonk all of our furniture in it and hope it is okay. I know not everyone has the luxury of kind of buying everything new, but I think it's almost a curation through when you do buy stuff, is that if the more kind of classic and kind of stuff, items that have been around for a very long time will always sit well in whatever property, like the kind of Dutch, Danish design classics, they kind of work well in kind of any situation. But I think it's having what's successful at ER Residence is the melting pot of things that we do have, in terms of some are older bits, some are kind of classic bits, some are, very kind of crisp, clean pieces of furniture, and it's that kind of amalgamation that we strive towards.
Have you ever been in this
process there? Sorry, Dane, go.
No, after you, mate.
At this stage of your process there, you're not actually really specifying furniture though, are you? You're looking for a mood, is that right?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. We're choosing furniture that we think works for the space. Obviously as a client, we're not saying you've got to buy it, but I think it's giving you an overall impression of how your space could work, how it could look, how it could feel. And we pick furniture based on obviously absolutely what we think is going to work in the space. But we realise at the same time that clients do have their own furniture, and if there's any one thing specifically that they've got an amazing sofa or other bits of furniture, we can find those online, we can use them in the renders to make sure that, or if there's a particular bit of furniture they're thinking about buying, we can get that into the image and, kind of check out how that works for the space at the same time with everything else that's going on.
And I think these visuals help generate that overall vision of how the furniture works in the space. But in that earlier image, quite that sofa we didn't actually end up getting, but these chairs we did. So it's just testing things as well. It's not saying this is your final design and this is what you want to do. It's just sort of a tool in which to review the design and reflect as well. Think about what's actually working and what isn't working.
Because say like on the previous, we didn't do the cabinets like that in the end. I think what we ended up doing was actually far more successful than what we were trying to pull through some of the materiality in terms of the Douglas fir plywood into this room, but it didn't really need it. The kind of room stands on its own because of how big and tall and impressive it is. So we went for something much more pared back. But then this we did pretty much exactly like for like. And what we love about this image as well is the kind of the timber wrap that comes down from the kitchen, which was one of the biggest kind of elements that we brought in. Was we wanted that continuation from the kitchen to the dining room to be kind of seamless and bring you through into the space, because it is quite a tight kitchen, but I think the more it felt like it was being pulled into the back room, it kind of became something slightly more than it was, a lot more accessible than it was when we bought the place, for sure.
And it really helps with the fluidity of the feel through the space, rather than just, now we're in the dining room.
I suppose if your aesthetic is to rely more on natural, already finished products, usually those sort of finishes are more permanent and not so easy to change. So I suppose when you are bringing in other pieces of furniture and you want to test those as much as possible.
Yeah, you want to kind of understand that what you're bringing in will work. I think a lot of the time, the same before, like the kind of design classics work because they're brilliant, and they work with most things. And I think the job of the architecture is to it's a backdrop to kind of enhance everything that you bring in. And that's kind of how we see our architecture and our furniture. They're all in one. It's kind of blurring the boundaries between both of those things, is where we kind of like to position ourselves, in that the joinery and things like they're inherent to the design. You remove them and then things kind of fall away a little bit. So it's bigger picture stuff sometimes with the joinery, as opposed to just being storage and things like that.
Yeah.
If one of your clients comes to you with a particularly personal item of furniture that may or may not suit your aesthetic, how do you deal with that?
It's a tricky one. I think as a designer, it's kind of, there's always a place for most things, but I think at the same time, it's unless it's got kind of huge sentimental value and it needs to go somewhere, that's absolutely fine. It just probably won't feature in any of the photographs we take, but it's
no, I think it's about reviewing what that piece of furniture is. You know, it might have some sort of element in it that really actually works in certain rooms that they've not considered before. And I think there's definitely an importance in when you have furniture that you have some things that are more sentimental, bring a bit more value from the client side into the project. And you know, it's about layering the age of the additional, you know, furniture, accessories, things like that. So not everything needs to be brand new. Some things are much nicer, older, and it's having that mix of like objects. So I think we would just review it and see what it's like.
I agree. No, it can bring a richness to a space that new furniture can't in certain aspects. They say like ER residents in the living room, we've got the kind of mid-century sideboard that kind of sits in harmony with everything that's teak, that's kind of very different to everything else, but it kind of works at the same time, and it adds history and age to certain items that if everything's new, it can feel a bit like a showroom. So I think that's why we like to use a lot of self-finished materials as well, that age, kind of as you use them, as you touch them, because they become uniquely evolved to that space and to your use. And that adds a richness and a depth to the overall space. And then some more images, just looking at the rear facade and how we were trying to create depth to the facade, because obviously the more you kind of push and pull the facade, the more expense you add to a project. So we were looking at how do we create depth and light change on the facade without kind of doing huge things. So we introduced the battening on the back, and then these projecting aluminium surrounds, as well as pushing the frameless window we see in the detail in a minute we'll get to, right to the front. So you get this really big kind of internal sill that you can sit on, and then you get the continuation of the aluminium fin outside, so your wall becomes kind of really thick, and when you're standing inside it, you can feel that thickness around you, and it kind of creates that solidity to the building, which otherwise if you've got brick and you're extruding and pushing, it can get quite kind of expensive and that kind of thing.
And these visuals sort of help to illustrate to clients so much more than what you can necessarily on a plan or an elevation, especially because it looks a little flat when you just got it in 2D. It's just like matter of fact. Whereas as soon as you put it in 3D, you can put the light on it, and really it brings to life what we've been trying to express to our clients. And this was an example of what we were trying to do to the rear facade of ER residence.
Nice. So just a couple of details of that. So essentially that window there in 3D as a render, it's part of what we kind of like to kind of pride ourselves on, is being able to take those ideas, but know about them in terms of buildability, that it's not just an idea. We know how to make this into something that functions and fulfills its design aesthetic at the same time, without trying to compromise too much in the transition. And like here, you can see the projecting fin that are fixed in behind, and everything's hidden. The lining through of the plywood with the frameless window, so when you look through, you see absolutely nothing. The plywood wrapping the blind box, so that sits up and out the way. It's kind of all those little attention to detail things that we want to make sure that we've really got kind of nailed in before heading to site, because it's kind of, the builder's going to build what's drawn. It needs to be absolutely kind of understood so that there's no kind of discrepancy.
You hear a lot of horror stories, don't you? And you see it on shows like Grand Designs, where you have an architect that has a particular vision, but then when it goes to being constructed or it goes to the engineers, costs spiral out of control, and the contractors have a nightmare trying to deliver on that vision. And I suppose that's really important in designs like yours, where it is all about clean lines and to minimalism to a degree. Those finer details are really important.
Definitely. And it's about, for example, that sort of what you just raised there about the engineers' details or whatever. It's really important to get those consultants on board quickly rather than as an afterthought, so that you can really get any sort of interface with those that might impact the overall vision kind of nailed down quickly before you go to site and it's all too late and no one can afford it anymore. So that's a huge part of these details as well. It's figuring out exactly where those structural elements lie in relation to the design and how that interfaces. And this details, this was of the door coming out of the dining room into the patio, and it was a simple sort of off-the-shelf proprietary door, but in order to make it look, better, we've made alignments with the inner side of the plasterboard linings to align with the edge of the frame, so that when you look through it, you're looking out into the garden rather than at a door frame. And it just seems like it's just the garden view and then the wall. There's no sort of like complications in between, kind of cluttering up your vision.
And it's one of those funny things where you would think by increasing the surround to hide part of the door, you think it feel smaller, but it actually has the reverse effect in terms of anything, all the obstruction goes from the view. So all you're seeing is pure garden through the window. And with this specific door, it has a very actual kind of neat little handle that kind of sticks out the side. And it's from further away, it looks more like a window, a fixed window, than a door. And people always come in and be like, "Oh, is that a window?" And it's like, no, that is the door as well. So it was a very simple thing to do, but it's kind of one of those things that helps elevate a kind of proprietary product into something more, which I think when you're dealing with budgets and things like that, that's the kind of mindset you have to have, is elevating kind of what's already there in terms of proprietary products. And this is just another detail, just kind of a joinery. This is how far we kind of drill down to. We will draw everything to the hinges basically of kind of joinery items. And I think that one of the most liked photos on our Instagram is of the kind of cat flap with the cat, which is this piece of joinery. And if the cat head was there from day one, we knew that we were going to use that to get it out, to have the cat get out. But it's more the detail that's involved in us understanding the alignments and how that was aligning with the door up here, that it was all parallel, everything kind of ran through, and it functioned. And again, it elevated a piece of joinery from what is just additional storage. It's a great bench, great dining bench, and it really works well with the flat.
I think it's like, people often have pets, and it's like, you don't want it to be an afterthought to cut a hole in your nice new glass door to get the cat out.
No, definitely not.
That sort of thing has been considered a bit earlier on.
No, definitely.
And we'll just go through these quite quickly in terms of what happens when we get to site. And I think for us as well, it's more how, of course we're going to say this because we're architects, but how important the architect is when you get to site, in terms of making sure that kind of design intent that's in the drawings is adhered to by the builder, make sure all the alignments are being hit, so that there's nothing that crops up and you're like, oh my God, like this doesn't work anymore. It is seen as sometimes the architect may, it's a luxury to have on site, but I think he's your representation in terms of making sure that you get what you've paid for in terms of the build quality and the design.
And it's important to find a builder that understands exactly your vision and the client's vision, rather than just, oh yeah, let's just build an extension, I know what I'm doing, leave it to me. It's got to be a bit more like a team effort to get to that stage. So a good builder really helps with that part of it.
Because it can be a kind of scary process when everything that starts getting knocked down and ripped out, and if you don't have an architect, it's just you and the builder, he can sometimes just be like, we'll just do it this way because it's easier, and you need someone out there batting for you to make sure that you're getting what you want in terms of design.
And also, there's going to be unforeseen issues on site. There always are. So if an architect's still involved, they're on hand then in order to answer questions about that and try and resolve and come over any issues, but still make it hopefully look good at the end of it. There's always going to be something, and it's good just to have that sounding board of an architect to do that job for you.
Do you try and convince your clients to kind of keep you on throughout the whole thing, or is it pretty much a done deal once you've taken them up to the design stage? The way that we're set out, and you can choose essentially how much service you want, but our argument is basically what we've said then, is that a lot of the architects, they come into their own on site as well in terms of your representation, because it's one thing to do the drawing and make it all look good, but it needs to be delivered.
for it to fully fulfill its purpose in terms of what it's supposed to be. And the architect is the person that's going to, it's their design for you. They want it to be as great as it can be. So they'll be there on site fighting the battles, to make sure that everything is being delivered the way it should be. So you don't have to take the architect, but I would say the result is generally better if you do.
Yeah, for us, for all of our projects, I think have so far we've all agreed site to be involved on site. I think most kind of end user clients really do recognise the value in that and kind of appreciate that extra element. Some clients that maybe are really much more involved in the construction industry and know a lot more about it, they may not be so keen, but I'd say like 90% of them are quite keen to carry us on through to site.
Absolutely. Sorry, Maddie, go on.
Please.
I absolutely endorse that. I think, if you haven't been through the process before, the benefit and the value that comes from having your architect on site is huge. If you can afford to do it, you should. I wonder, do you sort of help your clients shop for a builder as well? Do you have a long list of people that you like working with and talking to?
Yeah, we do have a few builders that we talk to quite a bit, and we have them various scales and different sizes. But at the moment, it's really hard to find a builder that wants to do anything. But it's in general, we do speak to quite a few builders, but we're always looking for new builders as well. And we're not averse to, like, if a client's got a builder that they really want to use, we'll meet them, we'll see them, we'll discuss how the process is going to work. We're not just going to bat them away because we have our favourite builders as well.
I think that also comes back to what we were just saying in terms of having the architect on site. If your budget can't stretch to the best builder that that can deliver, and you're going for a builder that has maybe not done a project that's kind of design led like the one that you're doing, is having the architect there to make sure that the builder is doing what he's supposed to be doing correctly really pays dividends at that point. If you're having to go with a builder that the architects haven't used before, or you haven't used before, or hasn't done a project of the kind of design magnitude that you're trying to do, having someone there like the architect that's been through it before with different builders to manage the process can be invaluable in that regard.
Yeah, and I guess it's when another thing crucial to have an architect on site is when the materials start arriving and the finishes, and it's one thing to get the sample board together and check that they look okay, but in reality they might not look so good. If you're working with natural materials and something turns out a bit unexpected, which can happen now and then, so it's good to at that point just have a little check of all your finishes, make sure everything's working together. And then when all the services start getting connected on site, it begins to look a lot more habitable very quickly. And generally, like the last few days, it turns from a building site into, you can imagine it as an actual habitable space very quickly, which you might not have done a week ago.
Yeah, it's always surprising how that happens, that it's literally like you've got completion day coming up and it's still a building site, and then literally over like 2 days it goes, everything's gone and it looks immaculate. It's always
hopefully immaculate.
It is surprising how much it looks like a building site right up until the end when it becomes a house. And that moment of kind of revelation is it makes it all worthwhile. Then all the stresses and struggles
you can see it in their clients' faces. The smiles start appearing when it becomes less of a construction site. Everything
you've spoken about for the last year and a half is kind of it's manifested in front of you, and it's kind of, and it looks great, and it's exactly what you wanted. Is that's the end goal.
Yeah, and the relief.
Do you guys still get excited about that when it gets to that point as well?
Because it's an idea that you've put out there, and you know how you want it to look, and you've done renders and things like that, but nothing compares to when it's in real life. It's the actual natural light that's coming onto it, and it looks great, and you just can't kind of quantify that prior. As to how good that feels to have an idea that goes through all of that and comes to fruition and looks just exactly how you wanted it. It's nothing better actually.
Yeah, I mean, we are, at the end of the day, we're designers, but it's one of like the longest forms of design art there are, really. I mean, it takes forever to get to that sort of satisfying moment. So these moments are so important for us as well as the clients, because it's like finally we've reached that point.
Nice.
And then, so for ER residents, after we, got the keys back, we moved back in, celebrated having a house again. We've been looking at all the furniture the whole time, and then it was about bringing that in together. And as part of this project, we decided to design and have manufactured a series of furniture to suit the space exactly. So this image on the left here is a coffee table, which we designed, and it brings in that further elements of that palette that we were looking at right at the beginning, adding that as like an additional layer to the architecture. And this image on the right is, this was actually some leftover material that we had from within the bathroom, and we thought it'd be nice to make some extra side tables using that, little side plinths, and just help to bring all the material on the palette through the whole project, just in that extra element as well.
Nice.
And this detail of one of the alcove units, that for us it was, we had this problem of those alcove spaces and making them look symmetrical and really bringing in that like dynamic element into this part of the property. And we really love using this black steel because it's so it's got such a lovely patina to it, and feels it's black but it's not black really. And these side tables, or these alcove units, they were really good for us because we could specify exactly where we wanted any like cutout holes to bring in cables and things like that for media use, and they suited the space exactly. We wouldn't have been able to find them if we'd have just gone to shops and tried to find something else. So it's those like extra elements, I think, were really good part of this project, really.
Yeah, this is a great bit when it's done and you have all the photographs done, and it's kind of, and I think what's quite nice to see is the detail that we showed you earlier through the section of the window, and then you see the window there, it's it's exactly as was drawn, and you can kind of, the depth that I was talking about, you can kind of feel from the inside to the outside. It becomes a much more kind of monolithic kind of cutout in the facade of what is essentially a very typical cavity wall construction, like block, insulation block. But then this kind of, the other elements that we brought into kind of elevated those kind of standard details into something there was a lot more bespoke and a lot kind of more evocative on the facade. And again with this, with the actual facade, the larch, we had the builder char on site while we were there. It was a kind of experimental way of doing it, and it actually has some really kind of surprising but amazing results in terms of, it wasn't black. It kind of changes with the weather, with the colors. It's aging itself on its own. It's like some of the stuff you can buy, it kind of just sits there stark black, whereas this kind of evolves with the light, the natural light, and with the seasons, and it's just naturally silvering on its own underneath the kind of darker bits, which is something we actually, it wasn't initially planned, but it's a real kind of nice outcome from something we experimented with. And then so the bits of furniture that Maddie was zoomed in on earlier, they kind of, with the light as well, the big pendant light, it's just the weight that those items bring that kind of really help this room, because everything else is quite light in terms of finish, but it really kind of grounds everything together. And the actual pendant light itself is quite difficult in these rooms to get a pendant light that doesn't overly dominate or doesn't hang too low or isn't a chandelier or something like that. And I think it was almost like it was kind of made for this room, the light itself, and it sits up there in the datum, which is really quite nice in this photo, that it's framed. It doesn't come below that kind of living zone that's kind of created through that clay datum. And you can see on the left where the light's coming through and how the texture on the clay stuff, it just kind of allows the shadows to just kind of fall away a lot easier than having them harsh, which is something we thought quite long and hard about before we did the clay itself. And sanding the floor that was there was probably one of the best decisions we made. Made a whole world of difference to take the dark sanding off. And although it looks kind of Spartan in here, I mean, we did live in a very curated space. That's how we wanted to live. Very kind of everything tucked away. I mean, I think we did have a sofa that was kind of framed for this, but it kind of is getting across the idea and the ethos behind the design, and this kind of warm minimalism that's not sanitized it's minimal, it's clean, but it's still kind of livable, and you can see it as a home. And then in the kind of newer part, we get into the kitchen, all the cleaner lines start to come through, and the layering of the materials, but it still retains the warmth of the other room, especially with like purposefully choosing like warm LED lighting as opposed to bright whites. It makes everything feel a lot kind of comfortable in that regard.
And it's just, that is the overall sort of hue and how the materials work against each other, not just, oh, we're looking at this material and this material, it's all how it all speaks together as one.
And we have the kind of the black steel shelf and then the black tap, everything's kind of tying in together subtly, but having the backdrop of the white terrazzo that's kind of with the grey fleck, it's not contrasty, it's not overly black white, it's kind of, it helps it kind of sit somewhere in the middle. So you're not looking at black white, it's kind of it's a lot more comfortable than that. And this is one of those photos I was talking about earlier that kind of almost has every single material that we had in the material palette kind of layered up against each other. The black steel, the grey, the white terrazzo, the Douglas fir, and the pine floor. And it's almost like a physical manifestation of that material palette in a single kind of image, which is why we kind of really love this photo.
And terrazzo is a really good material to use affordably. It's a natural material, but it you can apply it in a monolithic fashion, so it looks like something more than perhaps it is, it comes in a tile form. So well, this one did anyway, so that it's quite it's easy for the builder to do. It's easy to detail. We're not talking about bringing huge slabs of marble into a project, but it's a nice sort of material to use in terms of getting that sort of overall feel of a material.
And I think as well with the terrazzos, they're one of those things that's quite easy to get carried away with because there's so many choices. But I think going for, especially in ER residence, going for something that sat tonally with everything else kind of helped it just kind of meld into the project more than we've got this really bright terrazzo in here because we could. It's kind of, it's pulling everything together. And to the point where the smallest fleck in the terrazzo, the black, kind of ties in with the black taps and all that kind of stuff. So it's those kind of choices are quite important.
No, it's lovely. Like you said, it does all feel like it's one house.
Yeah.
All the tones, everything's kind of linked. It's lovely.
And this room is a shot of the master bedroom, and there's not a lot going on here, but I think at the same time it has the essence of all the other photos in that it's got the kind of slightly older element in the panelized joinery, but it sits in contrast to the really clean Douglas fir surround of the window, and then you have the exposed brick of the fireplace, which is an original feature, and it's that layering again that kind of helps bring these kind of modern elements together with the traditional existing elements of the Victorian property. And again, this is the kind of the view with the garden. So you can see there the detail that we were looking at earlier. By hiding the frame, you get that clear line of sight through into the garden, where it's little kind of green jewel at the back, just pulling you out. And again, with this, the main kind of element in here is the table. It's quite a tight space, and we were like, how can we get a table that works? So we designed one. We just kind of went for it, and doing the drum on the bottom meant we could push the table closer to the bench and get it out of the way if we needed to. But at the same time, it's quite a evocative kind of monolithic piece, which we kind of designed quite quickly. We just like, we'll just do this, and kind of did it. And it came, and
keep it simple and pray for the best.
Yeah, it was kind of surprisingly simple, really heavy though.
Yeah, but it was about bringing that material through again from the living room, and then the back shelf in the kitchen. It's all that sort of running the same materials through, and as well as like looking great. Yeah, this table also just was practically really good for this space, because when we didn't have gas, we weren't using the table. We could tuck it quite far in, so that it's still quite a flexible space.
This is my favourite view, by the way.
Just going back to what we were talking about earlier on. So that lintel that you were talking about at the start, Jonty, that's over this window here. You've retained that, yeah?
That's up here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Gotcha. Sorry, of course.
Yeah, this is the end of the house as it was, and this is all new. So yeah, that sits up there. So yeah, that aperture that we're looking through there was the old door and the window. So that the size of that hasn't changed from there, other than taking the brick away at the bottom. That was our breakthrough into the new bit. So it's real kind of simple, no gymnastics required structurally to do that, which I think is what really helped this. And I think what's great about this is all the lines of it are all pointing you towards the garden. So from the kitchen to the roof light to the bench, everything's getting you to kind of move out and through into the building, into the garden, sorry. And then the piece of joinery that we're looking at earlier, in terms of having the cat hole, which the cat loved, and I don't know, it was just kind of something slightly. It's quite a restrictive, kind of clean, flat, but to have this as just a little softening element, we thought was quite nice, quite playful, just to have that. And
you can see all those alignments running through from the joinery into the reveal of the door and out into the door, so that you can really see any frame from this image here. And it was just about making sure that on site all of that actually worked. And then this was the rear bedroom that we had plenty of discussions over whether it should be a bedroom or an office. And in the end, I won.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I was very kind of adamant that no, we should keep it as a bedroom, but that was pre-COVID, and it turned out invaluable to have a desk space at home when we had to work from there. So it's definitely one to Maddie on that.
And you want the view of the garden, don't you, whilst you're working as well? So.
Yeah.
But this just kind of shows how quickly it could be turned into a bedroom as well, if guests came over. Is actually designed so that the depth that's left where the desk is, that you can have a wardrobe and a dressing that will align perfectly with the window, at like 6 feet deep. So it's an easy switch if someone wants to have it as a permanent bedroom.
But I think for these sort of small properties in London, it's really crucial to think of spaces flexibly as well as just like this is one room, this is another. So this is a good example of how spaces can easily be reconfigured fairly with minimal interventions in order to sort of meet requirements.
No, definitely.
I mean, I think this kind of, it's just a small detail, but the joists that we took through on the roof lights, they're kind of a privacy thing as well. So you can't really see through them at an angle from anywhere, but they also help to just kind of diffuse the light a little bit, and the shadows that come through them throughout the day, it just adds a bit more interest, and it kind of helps you relate to the space in the day, kind of where the shadows are coming and how the light's coming through. And it just, again, like we keep saying, layering, it just adds another layer to the project.
Definitely.
And this is just a kind of nice shot from the bedroom where we've got that courtyard and just how it softens and opens up the property in the middle, where without it just being solid house kind of all the way to the garden, there is a break, and there's kind of interesting little bit of greenery in there as well. And yeah, kind of one of the images that we look at and that are really kind of happy about and proud about is how well this kind of sits in the garden. That's what the facade was about. That's why we took that approach, that it offset, it acted as kind of the perfect backdrop to the greenery that we want to introduce, like with the evergreen ferns and all that kind of thing, just to sit there, and it's kind of subtle but also quite strong, which is what we really like about it.
Did you work with a landscape gardener, or was that you guys as well?
That was us.
Yeah.
We knew quite early on we wanted to do something with the tree ferns. We had that from the beginning. It being a north-facing garden, it got sun right at the back, but not kind of in this area. So to have evergreens is actually is really great, because whenever you look out all year round, it was green, which was always really nice. And yeah, it was kind of, we loved doing landscaping ourselves, like getting into the garden and kind of plotting it out, which and then you see it's a bit like, it's slightly slower than architecture in terms of you plant it all and then you wait till the next year, and then it's kind of, you see everything that you did come out.
Yeah, and it's really, the garden is just an extension of the home, so it is important to think of it from the onset as well, the design process in terms of how any hard landscaping works, where the plants are going to be seen from, creating those views from the house, rather than an afterthought. So if there is a landscape designer involved, it's good to get them on earlier than, you know, at the end, so that there's that, it becomes part of the narrative as well. I mean, we always like to sort of make suggestions of plants as well, but we're not, you know, we're not gardeners. We don't know that much about them. We just have a good go at it. So we had a bit of help for this in terms of specking plants, but we had that overall vision. And in terms of how the layout works and everything, that was us, because we see that as part of the overall design.
You're the second architect in 2 days that have worked backwards from plants to design and finish the back of the building.
A real recurring theme, hasn't it? Everyone we've spoken to over the last 12 months or so has pretty much had that.
Yeah, definitely. And then just a few, we just selected 3 of our current projects, which they're all with end user clients, they're all kind of private houses and the like, just to have a quick run through of what we're working on moving forward. So this is a house for a couple in South London. It's a Victorian house. It was just too small for their needs at the moment, so they're looking to add an extension and have the rear and a side infill return, and also a roof extension and a dormer at the top. And we were looking at the materials as well in this, so it's that same sort of materiality that we're not just like copying and pasting from different material from the same projects, but again, we're looking at the self-finished materials, natural materials, ones that have that sort of like, it's about creating the palette rather than this is one material, this is another material.
I think as well with what you'll see in the next few projects is though, although we did ER residents from timber cladding, you know, we really love brick and we really love concrete, and we kind of love these kind of heavier elements. I mean, I know it's always kind of budget dependent, but it allows you to kind of play with scale and size and mass a little bit more, and it's kind of, it can be as tactile as timber, like the bricks and the patterns and the, you know, the kind of bricks that you choose and how thick they are and all that kind of stuff all plays into that. MR House in Oxford. Again, this is a kind of bigger one, which is ground floor extension, basement, first floor and second floor extension. And this is kind of, we're taking this a little bit rawer on the inside. The bricks are running all the way through. Again, that kind of material continuation is something that we explored in our residence, but kind of taking it to the next degree here. But then we're looking at exploring our knowledge that we've accrued ourselves over experience through using the in situ concrete steps or in situ concrete on the facade, and really kind of trying to put ourselves out there in terms of, you know, this is the kind of architecture that we really kind of get behind.
It's kind of that next step for you feel? Yeah,
I think it's that kind of, it's leveling up, it's pushing ourselves as well, but still wanting to retain, you know, the quality and the aesthetics. And I think you can still, it's having the same hands, so that if you looked at this finish and you looked at ER residence finish, you would kind of still know that the same architects were involved in the same project. And I think that kind of follow through is great, but you want to see kind of advancement at the same time through the body of work that you're kind of learning and experiencing more, and how kind of just life experience plays into how you design and how it comes through, but the essence of everything is still the same.
I'm looking forward to seeing this one.
And then this last one, Cotswold Studios, this is our first kind of project outside of London. It's quite, oh yeah, sorry, and the Oxford, sorry. This is the first one we got, sorry, outside London prior to that one. And it's quite a cool little studio. As part of someone else's, the client has a house as well, but this is something that's a bit different for us in terms of we've both worked in London for a long time on the kind of Victorian stock and Georgian stock houses, whereas this is looking at using Cotswold stone and hopefully trying to use the precast concrete gable, or reconstituted stone, as it can be called, in that kind of buff tone, that you've got this kind of old and new meeting on the gable end, and the rough and smooth, and how you play with the mass, and those kind of aspects. And then the interiors, the clients they're great. They're really forward thinking, design led. We've got this pretty unique sculptural staircase going in, where you can just see a little bit of it there, but it kind of floats up on the next bit, which is, although it's quite small, it's a real kind of out there project, which is allowing us to run with some kind of new ideas as well.
But it's the same sort of approach in terms of what materials we select. It's always how does the natural light play on them, and how do they look against each other? What sort of overall palette are we forming?
I suppose you have to go a step beyond that as well, thinking of local materiality as well.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
especially here when the local vernacular plays massively into how you approach it, but it's trying not to be too constrained by that, and trying to elevate. So doing the gable end and the reconstituted stone in a tone that sits with everything else is kind of a way of trying to push the boundaries on how those materials, contextual materials, can relate to each other, but still relate to the wider context at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that's it for us.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, looks like you've got some exciting projects coming up, guys.
Yeah, we do. We're really lucky with our clients. They all seem to be really sort of forward thinking, and yeah, we're excited about a lot of our projects at the moment.
And it's good now that ER residence is out there and people are coming to us because they like the work that we do, rather than just trying to find an architect to facilitate. So it's the clients are kind of wanting our design kind of approach, which is it's really nice to kind of have clients want to work with you and want to have your ideas as well.
Right, let me check the Q&A section. Chris, you got any questions, mate?
Yeah, I actually just sort of on that, related to that, Jonty, you guys, it was your own project, you're trained, you know what to look for. For those people who might be on this call who haven't yet purchased the property that they want to work on, do you have any advice for them in terms of what to look for, and in terms of plan, or bones, or whatever the case might be?
I think in terms of say London stock or kind of period properties, having the original features, kind of some period features still there, is always great. I think if you've got an idea of how you might want to spatially approach a project, or what you're trying to add, kind of understanding the limitations of a property at the same time, what's going to make you, like, what kind of property is going to make you spend a lot more to do it. Obviously with ER residence, we knew that the way that we wanted to approach it meant that we didn't have to do a lot of structural change to it. So it's kind of, I know it's hard for people that are maybe, they don't work in plan, to understand how they may change their property, but I think you're looking for good bones, solid structure, some good traditional features if they're still there, and great natural light, I think is is one of the big things.
I think a really simple and easy tool when people are looking for property is just to figure out very quickly how good a bargain you're getting in terms of the rate per square meter, and then figure out what your budget is, and potentially try and get the larger property for your budget, because you could buy the best house in the best area, but it might just be too small, and it might not be able to do anything. But if you look at a different area, you might be able to get something much larger, and it's that sort of square meterage which can really help us when we're actually designing. And what if they're asking for additional requirements in their property, having that space just automatically helps.
I think as well, it's like ER residence for us, when we first bought the house, it wasn't actually an area that we'd been looking at specifically. It wasn't really on our radar. And then we took a punt and went and had a look, and we're like, yeah, this is great. It's not the area, it's close to the areas we want to be in, but it's not the area. But it meant we got that extra for our money. It was a great flat, great features as existing, and it allowed us to extend without too much issue, and then kind of elevate the whole thing. So I think when people are looking for property, I think it's looking, and location is key, granted, but I think looking outside of maybe where you're fully focused at can open kind of more opportunities to properties that you're not maybe specifically looking for or looking at in those areas.
And then call you two as quickly as possible, I imagine.
Yeah, that would be great.
Any come through on the board, Dean?
Yeah, just a couple from Paul. He's asked, in the bedroom roof lights, are there actual roof joists running through the opening, or are they purely aesthetic?
No, those are running through. They're additional ones to get the setting out that we wanted. We ran through additional ones. So you've got your kind of 400 sensors that you normally have, but to make sure that they were running through on our skylight where we wanted them, we just got the builder to set out as we needed, and then finished around them. So that's it was easier to do it that way.
Yeah, I think originally we were thinking about having an exposed ceiling with all the ceiling joists open, but it just wasn't working in terms of structural layout. And also, it's quite expensive to do it that way, to do it nicely anyway. So this was a sort of good compromise to get that same sort of like filtered light that we were looking at and wanted.
And he's also asked, in the detailed drawings of the built-in bench, there is a circle within the cavity wall that is asked if that is a rainwater downpipe by any chance.
Oh, look.
He's looking at these detailed drawings very, very closely. He must be an engineer or something.
But we, so what we allowed for is not shown in the drawing, but there's actually a spur off that for an inspection, so you can rod from inside. You can get at that downpipe, so it's there's a little trap on it that comes off that you can get into.
There you go. Hope that helps, Paul. And I think that's it, mate. Have you got any more questions, Christopher?
No. I'm really excited to see what you guys do next. I think this has been a great presentation, really interesting. You've got a lovely, both an aesthetic and also sort of a really beautifully resolved way of designing, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for your practice.
No, I second that as well. I know me and Chris talk about your project a lot, so I'm sure it'll become a big inspiration for a lot of people who are going out there and doing their own thing as well.
Cheers.
Thank you.
No, it's been great. Thanks for having us. We've enjoyed sharing the project with you guys, and I hope it helps other people that are watching or inspires them to go for it with a project.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, guys. If anyone's got any other questions, please feel free to contact these guys directly. They're getting more and more popular on Instagram, so please go follow them. If not, get in touch with us and we'll see if we can help you out. Thanks very much for your time, guys, and have a great evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.